Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Barrett and I am going to be your host today on our webinar on community form building. Our presenter today is going to be Jonathan Su, and let's go ahead and jump right in. So we do have a blog, the Data Management Digest. I'd strongly suggest that you go check that out. Additionally, if you go into our community, we have a What's New section. And again, another opportunity for you to go in and see what's being worked on and to get better insight. Then we have two blog sections in a blog post called Medium. So we have Zerion Engineering and then the Zerion Customer Success. So that first one, the Zerion Engineering, those are blog posts written by our engineering team. And then the Customer Success one is blog posts written by our Customer Success team. We usually have blogs coming out once or twice a week, so I definitely suggest going and checking that out. All right, before I hand this over to John, let me go ahead and launch a quick poll so we can better understand who we have on today's call. Additionally, while we go through this, I do want to mention we do record these sessions, and in the next 48 hours, John will be sending out an email with the recording of this session as well as any of the materials that come with it. He'll also make sure it's uploaded to Zerion Academy, so if you have a username there, you'll have access to the resources in Zerion Academy, and if you don't have one yet, he'll go ahead and make one for you. It looks like everyone has now voted, and it looks like we have most people have the iFormBuilder plan, and there's a small percentage of you who had a trial account, but it's now expired. And let me do one more poll before I hand it over, and let's get your answer on your experience with iFormBuilder. All right, it looks like a good amount of you have voted, and I'm liking these results so far. It looks like at least everyone has touched it before, so I don't have anyone who's never used it, which is helpful, I think. More people on the later end that they're feeling pretty confident with what they have, and they feel like they can build some forms. So let me go ahead and close the poll, and I'll hand it over to you, John.
Thanks, Barrett, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this month's Community Form Building webinar. As Barrett said earlier, my name is Jonathan Su. I am part of the Customer Success team here at Zerion. And in this monthly webinar, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a form request each month that's been submitted either via the community, or a lot of the times we have groups who will email me directly specifically for this webinar. In this month's scenario, I want to give a shout out to Philip, who submitted this form that we're going to be working through today. So the way this webinar works, I want to go through the format before we jump into the actual building, is we'll start by posting requests on the community forum, as I said. This is the same link that you saw previously under the community post for what's new. You'll also find this webinar thread there pinned to the top of the forum. What you can do is you can register each month for these webinars. It's going to be the second Tuesday every month. These webinars are about 45 minutes long, and we'll be going through form building, as I said. As Barrett mentioned, also, you'll be receiving a recording as well as the form package that we go through at the end. It's a really good opportunity as a contributor to see how your form will look like on the iFormBuilder platform. And for those who are just participating and listening, it's a good way to see some best practices and some of the techniques I use when I go through and build forms. I highly encourage everybody to ask questions both during and after the webinar. Barrett covered all of the GoToWebinar control panel functionality, so you'll be able to ask questions during the webinar. If anything comes up afterwards, I encourage you to go to the community forums and post your questions there. I'll also be summarizing questions from the webinar in a post that I'll put up after the broadcast is done. And then finally, if you have something else that you want to take offline a little bit more detailed, always feel free to talk to us about your challenges. We're here to help you out. Whether you want to contact the sales department or support, you can also get a hold of the customer success team through our community, or the online chat is always a good option as well. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this month's form. Let's take a look at this. So what we have here is an employee timesheet form. At the top here, you'll see there's a section for a date. And then what happens is each of these employees is actually a truck driver. And so what they're going to be doing is entering the number of the truck, the mileage at the end and before. This will give you a calculation of how far the truck has traveled. And then they have a checklist of hours spent doing each one of these different tasks. You'll see at the top here, this column is going to be part of one employee's tracking. And then also down here, you'll notice that we want the ability to add generic text. So there may be tasks that are not already predefined, as well as the sum of hours for each of these different columns. Now, we're not going to be able to go through and build out this entire form in the shorter webinar format, but what I've done is I've highlighted a couple of critical components to the form, and I isolate these things because I think that there will be good learning opportunities for people on the broadcast today. Now let's go ahead and jump into the form builder. So here I've logged into the iFormBuilder control panel. Now I know that the overwhelming majority of the viewers today are existing customers, and so I'm not going to go into the super specifics of the initial setup here and the fact that you can sign up for a trial and go through that whole process. We're going to jump right into the form building today. So I'm going to go up to Forms and go to Form Builder. And if any of you who are longtime customers are still using the classic builder, I would recommend you use what I'm showing now, which is the newer form builder. It's going to have some additional functionalities and features. Moreover, we're going to be retiring the classic builder in the upcoming future as well. And so I would highly recommend taking any opportunity you have to become accustomed to this newer builder. The first thing we're going to do is go up in the upper right corner and create a new form. Now I'm going to go ahead and name this form Employee Timesheet, and I'm also going to put in parentheses here, April webinar. Now you'll notice that underneath my form label, I have a table name. This is going to be the identifier for the database table behind the scenes. Because I have this based on label button checked off, it's going to try its best to mimic the form label, of course making that identifier database friendly. What I want to do is check this off, and I'm actually going to shorten this a little bit and clean it up just slightly. As I scroll down here, I'd be able to add a form icon if I'd like, but for now what we're going to do is just go ahead and create the form right away. Now here is my device view in the form builder. This is going to be the default view and the view I spend most of my initial time in. What we're also going to see later on is this table view where you're able to see the elements in a more condensed fashion. But for now, what I'm going to be doing is starting with the first part of my form up here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to begin by entering in this date information. So I'm going to go here on the left-hand side, click on the date element. You'll notice it defaults the label and the name to my element 1. This isn't very descriptive, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the label. So I'm going to say timesheet date. And then one of the things I'm going to do real quickly is just save right away. We recommend saving as quickly as frequently as you can. In fact, if you don't save frequently enough, we'll actually prompt you to remind you to save, because the last thing we want is for you to go ahead and make some form changes and then lose those changes as a result of timing out or not saving enough. Now, one of the other things I'm going to be doing here as I go back to this form is I'm going to make a very quick enhancement. And this is something I identified when I was going through this form, and I noticed that it would make the data collection experience a little bit better. This is going to give us a layer of data integrity. What I'm going to be doing is adding a read-only element. I'm going to drag this to the top, and I'm going to go ahead and type in the person who's filling this in, right? So timesheet filled out by, and I'm going to, over here, type in timesheet user. Now down underneath, what I'm going to be doing is using a built-in function, something that we have built in for iFormBuilder. So I'm going to say iFormBuilder.username. And this is going to give me the username of the person who's logged in whenever they fill out the actual form. Now from here, the next step I want to do is I'm going to build out these 3 fields, and then we're going to go ahead and sync my device and check out what I have so far. So you'll see here, you're gonna have a truck number. And so what I'm gonna do is separate those fields with a divider. And now I'm gonna add in a field to prompt for the truck number. Now, I don't have a very detailed knowledge of exactly how trucks are identified with Philips data collection. So instead of using a number field, I'm actually gonna use a text element. And what I'm gonna say is I'm gonna write down truck number. However, what I can do is scroll down here and set the keyboard to a number pad. So that might be helpful. The last things we're going to do is use two number elements for the beginning and end mileage on the truck. So I'm going to write beginning mileage. And then we'll have the end mileage. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save my form, and I'm going to sync my device. Now, as this device is syncing, I want to talk through a little bit more about why I used a text element for that truck ID. Now, what happens is whenever you define the element's type, meaning its data type, you have to be very careful about this decision, because what's going to happen is if you end up changing that after you've collected data, you might result in some data loss. I know I've dealt with that in the past, and I'm sure some of the other people on this webinar have as well. But because of that, and because of the fact I'm not confident about the naming structure for the trucks, I went ahead and used a text element just in case we need to modify the values that it's going to capture in the future. I didn't want to start at a number and then have to change it to text later on. So from here, I'm going to open up my form. We're going to take a look at this so far. You'll notice that I have this webinars field filled in, the timesheet filled out by, that's the username I have. For the timesheet date, I'm able to go ahead and pick the current date and select that here. For the truck number, what I can do is fill in values here. We'll say this truck number is 1234. And then for our mileage, I'm able to enter in values here for both these fields. And so that's what we've built out so far within our form. Now the next thing I want to do is go ahead and write out this field here. You'll notice that there is a formula here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding in a read-only element, and we're going to be defining that calculation in what's called a dynamic value.
John, would now be a good time to ask questions, or are you going to bring that up later?
If questions have come in about what I've done so far, let's go ahead and take care of them now.
Sure, it was just about something in the beginning. So there's a question on if you have any best practices for the naming of forms and elements.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when it comes to naming conventions, there are a few best practices that we recommend. Especially when it comes to elements, it's going to be a little tricky. The overarching principle that you want to follow is that you want your names and your identifiers to be simple and concise, but they also have to be descriptive enough that you know what they are. One of the things that I run into very frequently is I'll see people with forms where it looks like this, what I have on the screen, but then underneath they don't change the data column names of the elements. So you would see my element 1, my element 2, my element 3, and so on. And what ends up happening is when they export their data, it's very difficult for them to make sense of it. So you want to make sure that your names are unique. You want to make sure that they identify the data that they hold. Now, when it comes to forms, we can be a little bit more explicit. You'll notice I simplified this form name just slightly, but one thing that we can also do is we can add in what's called a suffix for an underscore P as a parent or an underscore C as a child. And we'll talk about parent-child relationships a little bit later in the webinar. Basically, it's going to be a way for us to identify a parent form and then a subform underneath it. And so those are some of the naming conventions that I use on a daily basis. A big part of it, though, is going to be making sure that, again, your names are database friendly, they're short and concise, but still descriptive.
Great, thank you, John. That was the only question so far.
Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and handle this calculation here between our end mileage and our beginning mileage. What we're going to do is we're going to add in our read-only element. I'm going to say calculated difference. And even for this calculated field, you notice I go ahead and give it a descriptive name. Now, down here, I'm going to scroll down to my smart controls. These are going to be the advanced configurations for your form. So this goes beyond just enter an element, type in its value. You'll see for the dynamic value, what this is going to be in charge of is handling the actual value of the element, so the data that it holds, and being able to do that in a calculated fashion, whether it's a formula or we're going to do some sort of a mathematical calculation in this respect. So what I want to do is use the data column name as an identifier for this element as well as this element. And if we recall, going back to the form, we're going to do a subtraction between the two of them. So I'm going to take my end mileage, I'm going to scroll up, copy this, and paste it. I'm going to take my beginning mileage, do the same thing, copy it. And now down here, we want to do the subtraction of the two and paste it here. So let's go ahead and save this. And we'll take a look on my device and see what we got. Now, each time I make a form change, I do have to sync my device again to download the latest version of this form. So you're going to be seeing me do this a lot during the webinar. This is going to be something that I always repeat over and over again. Testing is very critical when it comes to form building. So you want to go through this process as much as needed, saving, syncing, and checking again. So let's put in some simple numbers here just to check to see if we get the correct output. All right, and you see that we get the calculated value underneath. So we have our 543, we set the beginning mileage at 500, and we get the difference underneath it. So this is awesome. This is set up well. Now, very briefly, what I want to do now is expand on our dynamic value and jump down here to talk about condition value. These two get mixed up pretty frequently, and so I always like to talk about them in tandem with one another. The dynamic value was used to control the actual data that was held inside of that element. The condition value is going to be a little bit different. The condition value is actually going to control the display of the element. So unlike the dynamic value, which evaluated to a number in this example, the condition value is going to evaluate to a true or a false. In the event the condition is true, that means the element is shown on the app. If the condition is false, that would mean the element is hidden. Now, this is what we use to develop what's called skip logic, and that's going to be the process where elements are shown and hidden based on values filled out in the form. So you're never going to need to write into the label text, if yes, skip to question 3. What we'll do is we'll just hide the questions in between. The data collection experience for the end user is seamless. They don't even know those questions were there behind the scenes. Barrett, really quickly, I just want to check in again to see if there were any questions that have come up.
Not at the moment, or not ones that I haven't been able to answer.
All right, thank you. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a step back from the builder and we're going to talk about the remainder of the form and planning what we need to do. Now, because you'll notice here, each employee is going to have a list of fields that they have to fill out over and over again. And you can have more than one employee here as well. We don't want to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times however many fields this is. We'll go ahead and say it's about 20 fields. We don't want to make 120 different data collection points, because what's going to end up happening is it's going to be a very poor data collection experience. And then just as importantly, you're probably going to have a lot of gaps in your data as well. You don't want to have all these blank fields if they only have one employee, for example. So what we're going to be doing is creating what's called a subform. Each subform is going to have an employee associated with it, and then we'll have the number of hours worked for each one of these different tasks. And that's going to be the direction we take this next. So the first thing we're going to do is define our subform. Then we're going to actually define our list of employees as the second step. And the third step is going to be to add these elements here on the left-hand side. Now, because I'm working with subforms, it's going to be separate from this top form that I have. What I actually want to do is open up another tab. This is one of the workflow tips that I always recommend, which is every form that you're going to be working on, open it in a separate tab so that you don't have to go back and forth by closing one form and opening another. It makes it much more easy to do it this way. I'm going to create my new form. I'm going to go ahead and call this employee timesheet April. Actually, I'm going to call it employee timesheet. Let's call this hours worked. Now, going back to what Barrett had asked earlier about a naming convention, this is where you're going to see this in play. This was the original name of my parent form, right? Employee timesheet April. Now, what I'm going to do for this subform is I'm actually going to put an _C here and say hours worked. Now, this C represents that it's a subform, and this is going to tell me what type of subform or what the values inside of this form are going to be related to. Let me go ahead and save this. And also jump up to my parent form and update this to show that it's a parent form as well. And I'll save this change too. Now, why would I go about doing this? Let me go ahead and show you what the home screen looks like now that I have my forms labeled correctly. You'll notice here, you can see employee timesheet April _P _C hours work. It makes it much easier to know if I'm working with a subform or I'm working with a parent form, because what you're going to see later on is that when we do pass values from one to the other, it's important to know where along the line you are. Additionally, if you have a subform here, there's nothing stopping you from having this subform be associated with another parent. And so when you make changes on it, you want to understand that this form is dependent on this form, or vice versa. And so making a change in one form could affect the other. So this naming convention is nothing more than keeping track and keeping organized of a single data collection project across multiple forms. It helps you get in and out of forms more quickly and know where you are inside of the data collection project. All right, moving on to my timesheet. The first thing I need to do here is add in the field for my actual employee. Now, what I've done here is I actually have a list, an employee list. And these are not Philip's actual employees. I went ahead and made a list of mock values here. First name, last name, email. And what we're going to be doing is taking this list and creating an option list off of it. So what I want to do is add in a pick list, which is going to simulate a drop-down menu. And I'm going to call this employee lookup. I'm going to scroll down here on the right-hand side to my option list section. Under option lists, I'm going to create a new list. We're going to call this employees. As I choose the newly created list, you'll notice I have both a label and a key value. This is going to be very similar to my elements, where the label is the text you see on the device, the key value is the identifier, it's what's stored behind the scenes. Now, I could type out every single one of these people. For example, we can take this first person and paste it in here. We don't want to do this for 100 people. This is going to be too slow. So let me go ahead and save this very briefly, assign it, save my form. And what I want to do is first show you what the pick list looks like on the app, and then after that we're going to go in and make a modification to it. So as I'm syncing my device, you'll notice that my subform shows up here as well because I haven't connected them yet. So any form I create is going to be assigned to my username automatically. When I enter in this form, this is going to be my lookup. As I press it, you'll see I get a window where I can scroll, select from the values, and then I'd be able to submit my form afterwards. Now the inline option list manager is really nice for small quick edits or for quickly assigning an option list to a form. But if you want to do more advanced setups and configurations with your option lists, my recommendation is to go to the option list manager, which is a dedicated space specifically for option lists so that you can manage them in a more customizable way. I'm going to go to my employees option list. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be uploading a CSV file. Now you'll notice you can download an example template here. I've done that already. It's right here, example.csv. And what it requires is a label, a key value, this column condition value is optional, and then a sort order, which is required. Now what I'm going to do is delete these values for now. And inside of my other option list, or inside of my other Excel file, sorry, let's go ahead and just grab the first names for the purposes of this webinar. I'm going to paste them here, and I'm actually going to mimic them here as well. For my sort order, I'm going to put a 0 down here. I'm going to use a very simple Excel formula where I reference the previous value and add 1 to it. Let's copy this and paste it all the way down. So this is going to be my option list. Now let's talk about condition values very quickly. A condition value is going to control whether the options are shown or hidden. Just like a condition value for an element, it's really no different. Because we're keeping this webinar pretty simple, we're not going to worry about condition values today. We're just going to take this file, we're going to do a save as, a CSV, and let's go ahead and call this employee option list. Save. All right, so we have our file here. Let's go ahead and go back over here. We're going to choose our file. We're going to I have to find the file now in my folder structure. Okay, and I want to empty and replace the current options. So that first placeholder option I made earlier, we're going to get rid of that. I'm going to click on upload. Now, this error, key value is invalid. I had this come up on purpose, and I actually did this intentionally. So what happens is your key value has to be unique. If I go back here to my option list, and if I highlight duplicates, okay, you'll notice we've got a couple of duplicates here. If you have duplicates in your option list, you're not going to be able to have multiple options that have the same key value. So this is something that you would have to reconcile before you do the upload. If we go back over here and I search for these values, you'll notice there's one that exists at sort order 23, which is most likely this one. But this second one did not get created. Similarly, if I do this here, you'll see the same thing. There's one value here, the other one is not here. So something to keep in mind, if you run into that error, most likely what it means is you have a duplicate inside your key value. If the duplicate was by accident, then you can just continue to move forward like I'm going to do during the webinar. Or you can go back, make changes to your Excel file, resave it, re-upload it. So now that I've made that option list, let me go ahead and make sure this is saved. We're good to go. I'm now going to go back to my device, sync, and then check out the option list. While I'm doing this, Barrett, have any questions come through that I could answer?
At this time, we've had a couple questions come in, and I actually just see another one. There's a question about updating an option list in bulk, how important it is to have the sort order. They're hoping you can give some more details on that.
Sure. So the sort order is a required field. When it comes to updating them in bulk, you'll notice the order in which I filled out my option list. I always do sort order last. And all I'm going to do is first organize these values, and then I would do the sort order. Now, the reason I do it at the end is because I want to make sure that these options are in the correct order to begin with, so that I can then use this simple formula for my sort order. Like I may have wanted to sort these values alphabetically to begin with beforehand. What other questions do we have?
I think that's about it for now.
All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at the option list. And if I enter this in, you'll see now I have this long list of users. Now, if your option list is very long, you may not want to scroll through, especially if it's not sorted in any way like this one is. So what I would be able to do is use the search at the top, and it will it'll reduce and filter values based on that search. So it's easy to do this. So now that I have the employee lookup done, the next thing is going to be handling these different values, the description of work, and then the hours worked for each one. Now, one of the things I want to do here, I'm only going to be doing 3 of these different lines, but I want to show everyone on the broadcast the different ways you can capture a value like this, something as simple as hours worked. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the first one, which is called inventory/warehouse. And I'm going to use a number element. And this is something that we saw with the mileage earlier. For operation of lines, I'm going to use a range element. And for the range element, what you're going to see is it's going to give you a slider, and there's an additional configuration here where I'm going to set the value of my slider, the low value as well as the high value. I'll leave this as it is now. And then the third one I'm going to do is actually a counter element. So this is going to be called monthly safety meeting. And the counter element does not have that additional configuration required. We're just going to go ahead and add the name to it. Let me save this, go back over to my device, and we'll take a look. Now, the reason I'm showing you the different element types is because what you're going to find as you go through your form building and improve at this is that different data points are going to have an element that is normally better suited. Now, all 3 of these elements can capture an hour reading, but the question is which one is going to be the best experience for the end user. Now, we're going to start from the bottom and work our way up. You'll see the counter element is going to have plus and minus buttons, and so as I press them, it's going to allow you to increment through whole numbers. The range element, I'm going to gesture on top of the little circle, and I can pull the slider left or right to figure out the value that I want. And then finally, the number element is going to be a simple numeric entry. Now, there's pros and cons to each one of these, and I want to detail them very briefly. The number element is going to give you the highest level of detail and specificity because you're able to use decimal points. However, you're going to have to, as you saw, press, open up a second window, type in your value, and hit done. So it's a little bit slower, but again, more accurate. With your range, this is going to give you a gesture so you can quickly go, all right, I want full, or I want, to be empty. And it also has a boundary, so it has a built-in validation to it as well. The downside here is that you have to have common increments throughout your range. And the counter is similar in that respect, except that you're not going to have beginning and end boundaries. So for example, I could say this is going to take negative time, which doesn't really make sense. Now, I can write in additional validation afterwards. However, when it comes to the end user filling it out, they may not know that initially. The other problem here is that, say I wanted to get to 10 on a range, it's very quick. I just go to 10. Here I'd have to press this multiple times. So you have to think about the speed of data collection as well. In my experience, what I found is that for a quick numeric value in a short range, the slider works best, or the range element. If you're going to be counting over time, then the counter works well for that. And if you need to have a very precise number, that's when you use the number element. Any questions about the differences there, Barrett, or anything that I've gone through so far?
Sure, we actually had some more questions that came in about option lists.
Perfect.
One specifically was wondering if they're able to edit an option list using the CSV upload.
Yes, right. So if you want to edit the option list, one thing you could do, let me go back over here to my option list manager. All right, go to employees. So I clicked on this up button here to do an upload of options. One of the other things you can do is actually download your options. So if I click on the download button, you'll see it downloads the CSV file for myself. And then from here, I can actually make changes to key values or labels or condition values as I want, then take this and then upload it again. So that's one way to easily do bulk updates via CSV for option lists.
Great. And then another question, or I guess more of a comment, was This person has had some bad experiences trying to upload a CSV file directly from Excel, and they learned something from you about using Google Sheets and thought that it would help if everyone else knew that as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I can give a little bit of a behind the scene peek. When I did the upload for the CSV, I actually crossed my fingers. I was about 90% sure it worked. I tested it earlier, but I've actually had that experience where Excel can be a little fickle sometimes. Let me show you why. As I go to the Save As inside of Excel, for a CSV file, a pretty simple data structure, you'll notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different options that they have available here. And each one of these different options, normally this top one works the best, but even I've had issues with it sometimes in the past. My guess is the issue is from it being saved in one of the other formats previously and then converted over. However, one thing that I've shown to work every single time is if this doesn't save correctly, I'll actually do a big copy. And then what I'll do is I'll open up a Google Sheet. I'll do a quick paste here. And I will download this as a CSV file. I don't know what the difference is between Excel and Google Sheets, but I've never had the CSV file give me any issues. So it's a small extra step. I don't do it every time because it takes a little bit of extra process. But anytime I run into an issue uploading an Excel CSV file, this is the first thing I do. Any other questions, Barrett?
Not at this time.
All right. So we've got our option list set up. We've gone through these different values. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to standardize all of these to a range. And so we can see what this looks like all together. Let me go ahead and save this. And I will open up the form. Once we take a look at this, the last thing we're going to do is connect our subform to our parent. We're going to clean up our environment a little bit, and then we'll have another round of questions that I can answer. So here, you're going to see we have these 3 different range elements, and this is going to be a very quick way to just gesture and scroll through these as you want. Let me go ahead and press done. And so that's going to be a really quick way to go about managing those different scrollers. Everything is on one screen. It's going to be a very quick data collection experience. So now the next thing we need to do is take this employee timesheet and connect it to our parent, which is over here. So again, what I want to do is I'm going to add a divider. And then I'm going to actually scroll down and add a subform element. So a subform is just going to be a mechanism where inside of one form, I can reference a second form. So I'm going to go ahead and call this employee hours worked. I'm going to set the data column name as employee records. Now I'm going to set my form for my subform just the same way I did for my option list, but I'm going to choose from a list of forms here. And again, this naming convention comes in handy because I can identify this quickly as a subform. Now the last thing I want to highlight about your subforms is that there are 2 link modes here, multiple and single. Currently the default is single, and what that means is that for one parent record, so when I fill out the initial part of this timesheet, I can fill out this subform one time. This is called a one-to-one relationship. Now this is not what we want. We actually want a one-to-many relationship, so I'm going to do a multiple mode. I'm going to scroll up here and save. I'm going to sync my device and we're going to take a look. So now instead of going to my subform, I'm going to go directly to my parent form. We'll see this is all filled out as it was before. I'm going to skip that section there, and under employees work, you'll see that I can do a lookup here, the user, and I'm able to handle these scrolling range sections as well. And if I want to leave one as 0, there's nothing wrong with that either. If I came back in here, I would be able to enter in another lookup, and I can just keep on going. Now, if I go back to my home screen, what you'll see is I have my parent form here. I have a record that's in progress. It's currently, you'll see the pencil icon. That means that it's in a draft mode. It's not completed yet. But because we don't need to access the subform directly anymore, and in fact, we don't want the data collector to access it directly, what we're going to do is we're actually going to hide that subform. So from here, I'm going to go to Forms. I'm going to go to Form Assignment. I'm going to choose my subform, which is this one. Select it. Go to Assign. And I'm going to remove Collect Rights. Now, I still want to be able to view the subform data. So I'm going to leave this here, but I'm going to remove Collect Rights. Update this. And let's sync our device. Okay. Now you'll notice the form still exists here. And this is one of the things that I've had other groups run into before. What I actually want to do is go ahead and clean my local database so that I'm going to start with a fresh slate. I'm going to sync my device again now. And what should happen is with the updated settings, you'll notice there's only 3 forms being downloaded. Finish my option list. And the sync is complete. And you'll only see these records available. So now the hours form is hidden underneath the parent. Barrett, any questions about what I've built today?
I mean, there's been lots of great questions coming in, but they've been answered so far.
All right, thank you. In that case, what I'm going to do is I want to finish up with a couple of recommended best practices and strategies. These are just going to be highlights of what I talked through earlier today in the webinar, and then we'll be able to close out for the day. So the first best practice and strategy is to please, please, please use subforms whenever you can. Whether you're taking a long form and breaking it up into smaller sections, or you have a portion of the form that needs to be repeated, subforms are going to make sure that your forms do not get out of hand in terms of scale. The second thing is with respect to the number element. This is actually a small tidbit I want to add in here. For those of you who have a more technical background, I want to highlight the fact that the number element is actually what's called a float data type. For those of you who may not be familiar with that term, don't worry about it too much. But the main takeaway here is that sometimes the number element, if you give it like a very specific decimal string, can have difficulty storing that value. And so if you're working with complex decimals, our recommendation is actually, in fact, to use a text element with the number pad like I showed you earlier for the truck number. To highlight when you want to use the counter element, you want to use this for simple controls, plus minus. You're able to count slowly, as you're literally counting an object that you see using the plus and minus buttons. However, it's not great for quickly getting to a value. What we'd recommend for that is the range element. When you have those boundaries as a start and a stop, a minimum and a maximum, the range element is going to give you the quickest ability to get through it. However, if your range is too large, it can be difficult to pinpoint the accuracy of that element. And then this last piece here is something that I always advocate for, is to get user feedback. Try different elements out. If we were actually building out this form, and Philip, what I would recommend you do is set some of the elements as numbers, set some of them as counters, and some of them as range elements, and give it to the actual users. Find out what they feel the most comfortable with. A lot of times there's other factors such as the environment or what other types of hardware that they're literally juggling between the data collection, and sometimes certain elements will just feel better for certain users. And so that feedback is tremendously valuable, and it's going to really make sure that your data collection has a high level of adoption by the end users. All right, Barrett, last chance if there are any questions that came in at the very end of this webinar.
I think we're all set, John. Thank you.
All right. Well, Barrett, thank you so much for hosting, and everybody, thank you for joining on today's broadcast. We're going to be uploading a recording of this webinar. I'll be uploading the form package as well, and all of that is going to be able to be found on the community thread. If you'd be able to answer this real quick poll as we finish up, this will help us in the future continue to refine these webinars and make them as meaningful as possible for everybody in attendance. All right, it looks like we have just about everybody voting. We'll leave it open for a second or two more. And it looks like based on the results, the webinar was a good review. Some thought it was challenging, but still informative. That's exactly where I want this webinar to be. I don't want this to be too easy where you didn't learn anything, but I also don't want it to be so difficult that you weren't able to follow along. So everyone, thank you again so much for joining. I do want to give a real quick shout out again to Philip. And also, if you all have time tomorrow, we're actually doing a special webinar, a special topic webinar on web forms, which is a topic I know that we've had a lot of feedback on. If you're in the community, there's been a lot of posts and activity around it. Some of our development team is going to be going through what the web forms look like. If that's something that you're interested in, I would highly recommend joining that as well. You'll be able to find information for it on the community. All right, everybody, have a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining. Bye.